the news broke like thunder over Windsor's gray towers. On a quiet autumn evening, Russian state television interrupted its regular programming with a 4-minute clip of President Vladimir Putin speaking directly to the camera. In measured tones, he praised the Princess of Wales Catherine as the guardian of a timeless legacy and a woman of her age who embodies courage, compassion, and cultural grace. It was not a routine diplomatic pleasantry. It was a statement with weight, a velvet gesture from the Kremlin aimed at the heart of Britain's monarchy. The broadcast did more than compliment. It carried a handwritten letter from Putin himself, sealed in crimson wax, inviting Catherine to visit Russia for a state-level reception at the Grand Kremlin Palace. The letter spoke of heritage, of bridges built by art and education, of a shared duty to protect children and the planet. It called Catherine the torchbearer of Elizabeth's light, and promised a reception that would honor her humanitarian work in mental health, early childhood, and environmental stewardship. Never before had a Russian leader singled out a British royal consort with such personal admiration. Inside Kensington Palace, aides were still reading the transcript when the story exploded across social media. Royal correspondents spoke of a soft power earthquake. Historians compared the moment to the unexpected warmth of 2003 when Putin toasted Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace. But this time, the tone felt different. The words were not about a reigning monarch. They were about Catherine, a future queen consort who had carved her own international identity through the Royal Foundation, Heads Together, and the Center for Early Childhood. For supporters of Catherine, the invitation felt like vindication. Years of quiet initiatives, art exchanges with the Hermitage Museum, youth forums linking British and Russian students. Her visible support for William's Earthshot Prize had built a reputation beyond Britain's shores. Now, the Kremlin itself seemed to acknowledge her reach. Commentators called it the Catherine effect, soft diplomacy, shaped by empathy rather than ceremony. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Even before Catherine could draft a response, another letter left the palace. This one bore the insignia of the queen consort. Camilla had written directly to Moscow, styling herself as the senior royal available to undertake such a visit. According to sources close to the Foreign Office, she framed her reply as a gracious acceptance on behalf of the crown, hinting that she would represent the monarchy in Russia in place of Catherine. The move, made under her own name, was breathtaking in its audacity. News of the counter-letter leaked within hours. By dawn, the story had turned from a rare moment of cross-continental admiration into a palace drama. Headlines split between Putin praises Catherine and Camilla steps in. In online forums, royal watchers traded screenshots and speculation. Was this a misunderstanding? A breach of protocol? Or an attempt to sideline the Princess of Wales at the very moment she was being hailed as the humanitarian face of the monarchy? Inside the royal household, tension thickened. William was said to be stunned but supportive of his wife. Aides spoke of an unprecedented snub and whispered about internal reviews of who had authority to answer foreign invitations. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's press office confirmed receipt of a letter from Her Majesty Queen Camilla, but declined to comment on its contents. The optics were stark. A Russian president publicly elevating Catherine, and the queen consort appearing to intercept the moment. This opening act framed a story larger than a single invitation. It raised questions about the balance of power inside the House of Windsor. It revived old narratives about rivalries between consorts, and it cast a spotlight on the very qualities Putin had praised. Catherine's work in mental health, early childhood education, environmental action, art and social welfare now refracted through the lens of palace intrigue. Across Britain, breakfast television panels replayed the clip of Putin's speech, alongside photographs of Catherine visiting a children's center in London. Commentators noted how his words echoed her own speeches on resilience and compassion. Then they juxtaposed it with Camilla's unexpected intervention. Soft power meets hard politics, one presenter quipped. Another called it the gossamer glove over an iron chessboard. At stake was more than a ceremonial visit. It was the image of the monarchy itself, a modern, empathetic force, or an old court still wrestling with its hierarchies. Catherine, for her part, remained silent, continuing her scheduled engagements at a mental health summit in Manchester. Photographs showed her smiling gently with young delegates, even as headlines screamed of Kremlin invitations and Camilla's countermove. By the week's end, what had begun as a diplomatic olive branch had become a cliffhanger watched by millions. Would Catherine accept Putin's invitation? Would Camilla's letter stand? And how would the monarchy navigate a moment when international admiration collided with internal maneuvering? This was not just a royal story. It was the first act of a saga about power, perception, and the quiet strength of a future queen caught between the world's gaze and her own household's shadows. By Monday morning, the headlines had reached every corner of the Commonwealth. From New Delhi to Nairobi, Toronto to Sydney, the story of Putin's praise and Camilla's counter-letter dominated front pages. Major outlets ran split images: Catherine, elegant in emerald green, standing beside children at a youth center in Leeds. Camilla, photographed leaving Clarence House, her expression unreadable. The world was watching, and the monarchy had no easy script to follow. The Kremlin stayed quiet, strategically so. A single line from its press office read, "We acknowledge the receipt of multiple letters from Buckingham Palace regarding the president's invitation. No further comment. But the silence from Moscow only deepened the intrigue. Was Putin waiting to see who the crown would send? Or was he letting the House of Windsor reveal its own fault lines? Inside the palace, the mood was tense. Senior courtiers scrambled to control the narrative. Unofficially, they briefed that Catherine had not yet responded to Putin's invitation, that the Princess of Wales was considering her options in consultation with her husband and the Foreign Office. But the public wasn't buying it. Across social media, hashtags surged. Number let Catherine lead. Number hands off Camilla. Queen ein waiting. In hundreds of thousands of comments, the message was clear. Catherine had earned the right to speak for Britain not through title, but through trust. One post that went viral read, "She walked through a health crisis with dignity. She launched real programs for kids, for mothers, for the planet. And now, when the world finally recognizes it, someone tries to steal her moment? No, not this time." Royal insiders knew that something deeper had been touched. For over a decade, Catherine had quietly built a global presence, not through politics, but through people. Her initiatives weren't flashy, but they were consistent. Whether working with mothers struggling with postnatal depression or promoting sustainable fashion at international design forums, Catherine had become the monarchy's most effective bridge between tradition and relevance. And now, that bridge was under pressure not from enemies abroad, but ambition within. Meanwhile, Prince William broke his silence. Speaking at a youth climate conference in Edinburgh, he deviated from his prepared remarks. His voice was steady but sharp. "We must be careful not to let ego interfere with progress. True leadership is not claimed, it's earned, over time, through service." To many, the message was obvious. William was standing behind his wife. Back in London, royal advisors huddled to prevent a deeper rift. There were calls between Clarence House and Kensington Palace. Some pushed for a joint statement. Others suggested privately, asking Camilla to withdraw her letter quietly. But sources close to Camilla indicated she was unmoved. "She sees herself as queen consort," one aide told The Times. "She believes it's her role to represent the monarchy internationally when the king is unavailable." Yet the public disagreed. Polls conducted by YouGov and Sky News showed overwhelming support for Catherine leading the potential visit to Russia. In one survey, 83% of respondents across age groups said the Princess of Wales best represented modern British values. Camilla trailed far behind, especially among younger demographics. The question now wasn't just who would go to Moscow. It was who spoke for Britain in the eyes of the world. As pressure mounted, Catherine remained composed. She continued her schedule as planned, visiting an early learning center in Birmingham, then speaking at a summit on maternal health, where she delivered a calm, heartfelt message. When we listen to mothers, to children, to communities, we discover that real change starts with empathy, not power. No mention of Russia, no mention of Kremlin invitations or royal rivalries. But the meaning wasn't lost on anyone. That same day, an unsigned opinion piece appeared in The Times, widely suspected to be penned by a former royal advisor. Its final paragraph read, "In diplomacy, as in royalty, presence matters. But more important is resonance, who truly connects. Catherine doesn't speak loudly, but when she does, the world listens." Back in Moscow, the video of Putin's original speech continued to circulate. Subtitled in 15 languages, it reached over 45 million views in less than a week. In one poignant moment, he described Catherine as a symbol of quiet strength in an age of noise. That line was now quoted by British MPs, UN ambassadors, and even late-night comedians. The irony was impossible to ignore. As Camilla claimed protocol, Catherine won the people. By the end of the week, a new letter had reportedly arrived at Kensington Palace, this time from Russia's First Lady, personally addressed to Catherine. It praised her work in mental health, maternal welfare, and child education, and expressed hope for future collaboration between our nation's women. The power shift was no longer subtle. It was happening in real time. Kensington Palace remained silent. No official statement, no press conference, no acceptance or rejection of Putin's invitation. And yet, the world couldn't stop talking. Every day that passed without a reply seemed to deepen Catherine's mystique. Her silence wasn't seen as indecision. It was interpreted as calculated grace. While headlines screamed and commentators speculated, the Princess of Wales stayed focused on her work, quietly attending meetings with early childhood educators, mental health practitioners, and climate researchers. But behind closed doors, the stakes were rising. According to palace insiders, Catherine was in private talks with the Foreign Office, consulting senior diplomats and legal advisors. This wasn't about vanity. It was about ensuring that every move aligned with Britain's national interests, humanitarian values, and royal integrity. What she understood, perhaps better than anyone, was that accepting the invitation wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a message to the world about how Britain sees itself in the 21st century. At the same time, messages of support were flooding in. From New York, the director of UNICEF sent a handwritten letter thanking her for changing the global narrative around childhood trauma. From Oslo, a group of Nordic ministers requested a joint summit on maternal mental health. Even from South Africa, former partners of the Royal Foundation sent warm endorsements, praising Catherine's ability to connect local challenges with global solutions. It was becoming clear, Catherine didn't need to prove herself to the world. The world was already waiting. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the mood shifted. Camilla's decision to reply to the Kremlin was no longer seen as bold but isolating. Senior aides reportedly advised her to issue a follow-up letter, clarifying her position as ceremonial in nature, but the Queen Consort refused. She believed she had the right, said one former courtier. But what she miscalculated was the mood of the moment. Indeed, even King Charles was said to be uneasy. Though he remained publicly neutral, several close friends told the press he was troubled by the optics and aware that public trust was firmly behind Catherine. Within the palace, lines were quietly being drawn. Some senior courtiers began shifting their allegiance. Staff who once worked under Clarence House discreetly requested transfers to Kensington. Even longtime royal correspondents noted a subtle change in protocol. Catherine's schedule was being highlighted more often in press briefings, while Camilla's was given secondary placement. To many, it felt like a turning tide. But Catherine, always strategic, always disciplined, refused to play into drama. Instead of confrontation, she focused on visibility. She hosted an intimate roundtable with mental health charities at Windsor. She made an unannounced visit to a refugee arts program in East London. And when asked by a reporter outside the venue whether she planned to visit Russia, she responded with a gentle smile and only 6 words. Every invitation deserves careful, respectful thought. Those 6 words became an instant headline. By now, Putin's office had received no official response, but neither had they withdrawn the invitation. State media in Russia began airing profiles of Catherine, highlighting her work with the Center for Early Childhood and the Earthshot Prize. On the Kremlin's official website, her name appeared under a new section titled People of International Importance. It was clear the Russians were not courting the monarchy, they were courting her. And then came the moment that shifted the narrative entirely. A joint statement was released by UNESCO and the World Health Organization, naming Catherine as a global champion for early childhood mental health, the first royal in history to be given such a title. The citation read, "For her tireless advocacy, innovative approach to early development, and her role in bridging global institutions with local communities." This wasn't just another ceremonial patronage. It was international recognition of real-world impact, the kind of validation no title could manufacture and no rival could diminish. By this point, even traditionalists within the British establishment began to shift tone. A rare op-ed in the Telegraph, historically aligned with Camilla's camp, admitted, "The monarchy has long been shaped by duty, but in Catherine, we see the evolution of duty into empathy, and that is what modern Britain wants to follow." Back inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Some said Camilla had overstepped. Others called it a misread of the modern era. A senior aide was even overheard saying, she mistook position for presence. And still, Catherine said nothing. She didn't correct. She didn't confront. She simply continued with clarity, with calm, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that true influence speaks for itself. For 12 days, the Princess of Wales had remained silent. 12 days of headlines, speculation, op-eds, televised debates, and diplomatic whispers. 12 days of public support pouring in from every continent. And now, on the 13th day, she spoke. At precisely 9 a.m., a statement appeared on the official website of Kensington Palace. It was short, deliberate, and powerful. Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, is grateful for the kind words and invitation extended by the President of the Russian Federation. At this time, she has respectfully declined the visit. However, she remains committed to building bridges through shared values in the areas of early childhood, mental health, and cultural exchange. No drama. No defiance. Just diplomacy sharpened to perfection. The media response was instantaneous. CNN called it the most graceful geopolitical no of the decade. The BBC said, Catherine turns down Moscow, but steps up on the world stage. Oh, even Al Jazeera described the move as a masterclass in modern royal statesmanship. But the real story wasn't just in the statement, it was in what followed. Within hours of her decision, 3 international organizations issued formal commendations. UNESCO expanded her global champion role to include cross-cultural cooperation. WHO confirmed a joint mental health initiative between British and Russian researchers, reportedly seeded by Catherine's team months earlier. UN Women publicly invited her to keynote at their annual global summit in Geneva. And then, something truly unprecedented happened. That evening, the Kremlin released a video response. Unlike the first message, formal and structured, this one felt personal. Putin, seated in the same wood-paneled room, looked straight into the camera. His words were slower this time, his tone softer. The Princess of Wales has chosen dignity over diplomacy, and in doing so, has proven why she commands global respect. While we regret her decision not to visit Russia at this time, we honor her commitment to the causes that unite us, all the well-being of children, the resilience of families, and the healing of our shared planet. He ended with a toast, not of vodka, but of silence. A raised glass. A simple nod. The symbolism was clear. She had declined the trip but risen in stature. For Catherine, this wasn't about borders. It was about boundaries. She had drawn hers clearly, firmly, and without offense. And the world, including Russia, had listened. Back in London, the political establishment exhaled in quiet relief. Privately, senior government officials had been concerned about the optics of a royal visit to Moscow amid ongoing global tensions. Catherine's response had resolved the dilemma without creating waves. She had declined the invitation but extended a message of unity, so compelling that even her would-be hosts admired her for it. In the halls of Westminster, one MP was overheard saying, "That's not just a royal, that's a stateswoman." Meanwhile, within the royal household, the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. Camilla, once defiant, had not issued any follow-up statement. The letter she had sent to the Kremlin, the one written under her own name, was now seen as not only premature, but politically tone-deaf. According to royal correspondence, King Charles summoned both Kensington and Clarence House aides to a closed meeting, where he reportedly reminded everyone that the crown speaks as one or not at all. But the public wasn't waiting for internal reconciliation. They had already chosen their symbol. In art galleries across Europe, new exhibitions were being announced under the title, The Quiet Crown, inspired by Catherine's global influence. In French and German newspapers, editorials praised her as the future of soft power. In Canada and Australia, government ministers expressed interest in co-hosting early childhood summits in partnership with the Royal Foundation. What had started as a diplomatic curveball from Moscow had evolved into something greater, a moment of international clarity. Catherine wasn't just a royal consort. She had become a global reference point for dignity, restraint, and impact-driven leadership. And at home, her influence deepened even further. Prince William, speaking at a private gala for Earthshot, took the podium with calm resolve. The work we do today, the tone we set, the way we listen, these will define the world our children inherit. I am proud to walk this path alongside someone whose grace has made that future a little clearer for all of us. He didn't name her. He didn't need to. Across the gala hall, eyes turned to Catherine, serene in a deep navy gown, seated near a table of young environmentalists. She smiled quietly, then leaned forward to listen. At that moment, she wasn't just the Princess of Wales. She was the woman the world listened to even when she said no. The Kremlin had accepted her refusal with grace. The world had applauded her restraint. And now, it was the palace that had to reckon with the aftershocks. Behind the gates of Buckingham, it was not the headlines that caused tension. It was the silence that followed. No apology from Camilla. No explanation. Not even an acknowledgement that she had overstepped. But the consequences were already in motion. Inside the royal household, her move had triggered a quiet rebellion. Staff who once served under Clarence House now openly praised the professionalism and clarity of the Kensington team. Juniors whispered about the real queen in waiting. Seniors stopped correcting them. Even the tone of official briefings shifted. Where Camilla had once been listed first in palace press releases, she now followed Catherine. Subtle, but unmistakable, Camilla noticed. At a charity reception in Scotland, she arrived to find herself seated next to local dignitaries, not heads of state. Photographers barely raised their cameras. When asked about her recent engagements, she smiled tightly and said only, "I go where I'm asked to be." But the damage had been done. Her letter to Moscow, written without consultation and sent under her own name, had become a textbook example of royal misjudgment. Worse, it had happened at a time when Catherine was being internationally hailed as the embodiment of modern monarchy, and not just by media, but by the Queen's own former advisors. Lady Alice Forrester, once one of Elizabeth II's most discreet and loyal aides, gave a rare interview to the Sunday Times. The late Queen understood that influence does not shout. It builds, slowly, through action, not access. Catherine understands this. She doesn't act royal, she is royal. That line hit hard, especially inside Clarence House. King Charles, caught between loyalty to his wife and admiration for his daughter-in-law, was said to be deeply unsettled. Privately, he summoned Camilla and William to separate meetings. Details never leaked, but court watchers noted a distinct change in tone during their next joint appearance. Camilla appeared tight-lipped and withdrawn. William stood beside Catherine, hand at her back, his expression calm but firm. There was no public tension, but the distance between them was visible in every photo. Meanwhile, Catherine's international presence only grew stronger. A week after declining Putin's invitation, she addressed a global summit on maternal mental health in Geneva. She didn't mention Russia. She didn't mention royalty. She spoke of mothers, children, trauma, and hope. When we invest in the earliest years, we lay the strongest foundations, not just for individuals, but for nations. The applause was thunderous. Delegates from over 90 countries rose to their feet. Her words were quoted in health ministries from Canada to Kenya. Even French President Emmanuel Macron, present at the event, tweeted, "True diplomacy wears many faces. Today, it wore empathy and wisdom." And still, Catherine remained grounded. She returned to London that evening, and was seen the next morning doing the school run with George and Charlotte. No entourage, no announcement, just a mother walking her children to class in the rain. That image went viral. One caption read, "Global icon on Thursday, school mum on Friday, that's Catherine." Back in the UK, public opinion had solidified. Polls showed a record 92% approval rating for Catherine, the highest for any royal since Princess Diana. Even lifelong monarchists, who had once hesitated, now declared her the beating heart of the family. She was the future, and everyone knew it. Everyone, including Camilla. In private, sources say she began canceling engagements, citing fatigue, needing time to reflect. Behind her words was a truth impossible to ignore. The Queen Consort had miscalculated the times. She had acted from protocol. Catherine had acted from principle. And the difference had never been clearer. Royal commentators began asking an uncomfortable question. What does it mean to be Queen Consort when the world already sees someone else as its queen? It wasn't about titles anymore. It was about trust, about character, about legacy. In the drawing rooms of aristocratic London, at garden parties in the Midlands, in bustling cafes across the Commonwealth, the conversation had changed. It was no longer, when will William be king? It was, when will Catherine lead? And perhaps most telling of all, inside the palace, aides stopped correcting the phrasing. They let it linger. Because deep down, everyone knew. The crown had already begun to shift, not in law, not in title, but in heart. And no letter, no signature, no royal seal could reverse that. The shift didn't happen with a coronation. There were no trumpets, no crowns passed, no public declaration. But across Britain, and beyond, everyone felt it. The Princess of Wales had become something more. In the weeks following the Kremlin controversy, Catherine's public schedule remained steady, but its tone had changed. No longer just engagements. Now, every appearance carried weight. Every word spoken became a headline. Every silence, a message. At a mental health roundtable in Copenhagen, she spoke softly of resilience. At a children's art festival in Liverpool, she kneeled to tie a young boy's shoe. At a quiet visit to a hospice in Cornwall, she spent 40 minutes alone with a mother whose child had just passed. There were no cameras inside that room, but the story spread anyway, told by the nurses, whispered by the walls. She was no longer just the future Queen Consort. She was the emotional center of the crown. Inside the palace, decisions began reflecting this new reality. One morning, a subtle change appeared on the royal family's official website, a new section titled Royal Leadership in the Modern Era, with Catherine's image at the top. It wasn't protocol, it was perception. And perception, in monarchies, is legacy. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's calendar grew emptier. She still appeared at the occasional charity luncheon or ribbon cutting, but the spotlight had softened. Even her supporters in the press grew quiet, focusing instead on features about Catherine's global footprint or the Wales way forward. Clarence House no longer issued pointed statements. There was no retaliation, only retreat. Privately, Camilla was said to be reflective but proud. How? Some sources claimed she had made peace with her role, understanding that the crown she wore was ceremonial, while Catherine's had become cultural. In one moment of rare candor, captured off-mic at a private reception, Camilla reportedly said, "She has what the world needs now, and I had my time." And perhaps that was true, because Catherine hadn't taken anything. She had earned it moment by moment, year by year. Through kindness, through courage, through consistency. Even King Charles, once the center of every decision, began stepping further into the background. His health, while stable, was no longer the central concern of the public. What people talked about was what Catherine would do next. The answer came one rainy afternoon, at a joint press event with Prince William. Held at the Royal Foundation's new global headquarters, the couple unveiled a sweeping international initiative, the Early Futures Accord, a coalition of over 20 nations, dozens of NGOs, and academic institutions committed to reshaping early childhood education, maternal care, and community mental health across 5 continents. William opened with grace, but it was Catherine's speech that stilled the room. "We are shaped by our earliest moments, not just by what we're taught, but by how we are loved. And in that truth lies our greatest power, to lift each other across borders and generations, so that no child grows unseen, no parent feels alone, and no future is forgotten before it begins." For the first time in months, even palace critics had nothing to say. There was nothing to attack. It wasn't politics. It wasn't palace power play. It was purpose, and it was undeniable. That night, the BBC aired a special titled "The People's Queen Too Soon?" It featured scholars, charity workers, and former diplomats. Each spoke not of titles, but of trust, not of crowns, but of connection. The conclusion was clear. Whether or not the monarchy endures for centuries to come, its present now belongs to Catherine. In Russia, state media aired a brief but respectful segment showing Catherine's speech, followed by a quiet shot of Putin watching it in his office. No words, just a nod. Back at Windsor, a different kind of transition was underway. Princess Charlotte, recently turned 10, had begun joining her mother on low-profile visits, schools, shelters, community centers. Insiders said she was already asking how to help. Prince George, now stepping into adolescence, had taken up conservation science projects inspired by Earthshot. Even little Louis had begun attending early learning events, accompanied by a mother who still bent to tie his laces, even as nations rose when she entered the room. This was the new monarchy. Not loud, not perfect, but present. And as one royal historian wrote in The Telegraph, Queen Elizabeth led with elegance. Catherine leads with empathy. One ruled by duty, the other reigns by trust. The world may never see a formal coronation for the Princess of Wales, but it may not need to. Because in the hearts of millions in mothers, in children, in silent rooms where healing begins, the crown has already found its new bearer, and she wears it lightly,